Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mark's Backyard Birds. We are live tonight, and then when we have a guest in, it always is a little bit tricky because I'm no expert at this, and so we have to make sure we're communicating. And you can see Mary and you see me. Let me get over here to get to the right screens and get right clicking. Melanie's feverishly trying to get logged in so she can help. For those of you who haven't heard, I think it talked to me a little bit last time. We did the crazy thing. We're actually going to be moving, and this week, last 2 weeks have been super crazy for us to get ready for that. If you've ever knew, you know what I'm talking about. Move is a 4-letter word for a reason. So, Marion's been gracious enough to join me tonight, and because I am absolutely no expert when it comes to plants and wildflowers and the like. So we are going to talk about our favorite plants for attracting hummingbirds. And the history here is I get a lot of requests for plant programs. What plants should I plant in my yard? Well, the reason plant programs are so difficult is because this it goes out to a whole lot of people. You guys are located in all corners of the United States, and all the varied habitats. I've got desert people, I've got mountain people, and I've got people in the Great North Woods and Florida people, and to do a program on what plants you should plant to attract wildlife is pretty difficult. And remember, I'm here in the heart of the country. We're in Kansas City, Missouri, so we're in a smack dab in the middle of everything. And when we talk about things, dates and migration, things, those kind of things, I always remind you that if you're north of us, you're going to be off a little bit. And if you're to the south of us, some of the stuff may have already happened. So, and when it comes to wildflowers, and Mary's certainly the expert, and I will introduce her in just a minute, that a lot of things depend on. If you ever hear me talk about wildflowers and recommend planting, I am really always an advocate of planting native wildflowers. And the reason for that, of course, is that native wildflowers are adapted to your soil types. They're adapted to your pollinators that are in your area. They're adapted to drought conditions. They don't require extra water. They don't require fertilizers, things like that. And they're just the best if you can plant with them. But again, we have a great native wildflower nursery, a couple of them here in the Kansas City area are close enough that we have access and we can refer people to them all through the year. And then we have a couple of native plant sales. We host them at the store every year, and Mary's the one who started all that for us. And but wherever you live, I have sent some of you guys emails whenever you ask this question, and tried to get you to look up and search for your state wherever you are. I know Texas. I was talking to a guy down in Texas, trading emails with him, and encouraged him to look up, native wildflowers nursery, native wild plantings, grow native for the state of Texas, because Texas is such a huge state and the habitat's quite varied across there. But you want native, when you're doing planting of native wildflowers and trees and shrubs in your yard, you want those seeds and those seedlings to have been collected and grown in your local genotypes, as we call it, meaning they came from your area. If you're trying to make a plant that the genotype is from Alaska or Wisconsin, and you're trying to grow it in Texas, you're probably going to have some issues. So we talk a lot about native plants, and we really encourage you to seek out local. But with that, we have our favorites, and a lot of these do grow all over the country. I know one of our I'm going to be talking about. I had in my yard in North Carolina, and I loved it, and it does really well out here in Missouri. So there are some that are pretty widespread, but when you go to purchase them, you try to find those native sources right in your area. That's something that we want to get out there. And you know how I am at the first. I try to give people time to get on, because it takes a little bit for everybody to get on. And I know August is a huge vacation month, so a lot of people are out on the road, and bird feeding slows down, and our traffic slows down because of a lot of vacation, back to school, and all that going on. So we're going to give some people some time to get on here. Usually try to give them at least 5 minutes or so before we get good and started. So, Mary, how are you tonight?
I am good. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. For you guys that have that been on with me before, Mary was on a while back. What were we talking about? We were talking about migration and lights out. What did I can't remember all what we were talking about on that last time you were here, something like that.
Something
But
like
to
that.
introduce her, this is Mary Nemecek. It took me forever to learn how to pronounce her name, and we've been friends for years and years because of the race car driver named Nemecek. And I always tried to say your name that way, but it's Nemecek, right?
It is. Yep.
It
But I
is.
answered anything close, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. And Mary and I have been friends for a long, long time. I was trying to look up. I remember the first pictures Mary ever sent me when we first met. She took some pictures of a hen mallard at a park somewhere, and she sent them to me. And I think that's the first photos that Mary sent to me, and was asking me about them. And then from there on, she's become an incredible birder, and she's always been dedicated to nature. Are you still the conservation chair at Burroughs Audubon?
I am. Yep.
Yeah, the local Audubon chapter here in Kansas City is called Burroughs Audubon, and Mary's been the conservation chair now for quite a while, and she's been involved in so many things. Big advocate for the monarch and their projects and caring for monarchs, and also you helped start a native plant initiative here in the Kansas City region. And she's done countless things, but she is definitely my expert when it comes to the flowers and wildflowers. So I think I'd much rather have her talking about some of these plants than me, like I said. So we invited her in tonight, and we welcome you guys in. So Mary, hummingbirds.
I
What
love
kind
them.
of flowers are hummingbirds most attracted to?
So, well, anything that produces nectar, although they like conical, brightly colored flowers. Everybody says red's their favorite color, and I wouldn't argue with that. But that doesn't mean that they only feed on red flowers. But they really like those conical, elongated flowers where they can kind of dip down into them. It's not the only thing they feed on, but that's probably their favorites. If you have those in your yard, you're probably going to notice your hummingbirds around.
And when I talk to people about hummingbird feeders, we always try to encourage them to stay away from yellow, the color yellow, on their hummingbird feeders because of bees. And bees are right now really in the forefront. I'm getting tons of questions about bees on hummingbird feeders all across the country right now. It isn't there that proven that bees are attracted to the color of yellow?
Bees see colors very differently than we do. If you look online, you can actually find images of the ultraviolet kind of range of colors and how bees see it. Flowers will actually kind of have, I want to say, runway markers, the way that they're colored, the way that insects see them, that direct them down into the nectar.
Right.
So they do see colors differently than we do. Um, I would argue that they're more attracted to yellow, but I mean, if you've got nectar out, bees are probably going to find it. Just
Yeah.
like if you have conical flowers out, hummingbirds are going to find it. So, um,
Yeah. It's a fact of life, and a fact of hummingbird feeding and bees. And I had a guy did not like what I had to say. He for some reason he was convinced that the picture I had on my keeping bees had a hummingbird feeders video. It was a swarm of honeybees on a hummingbird feeder, and he was convinced that they were yellow jackets, and I was giving hummingbirds a bad name. I mean, giving honeybees a bad name, and we traded a couple of emails on that. But honeybees, are pretty harmless, and they're very helpful, and they never encourage anybody. And what I tried to explain to him is what I try to advocate to them to people is how to live with them and how using a sacrificial lamb feeder to try to draw them away and give them the sugar water and things as well. But and then of course the topic of yellow jackets is a whole different thing. So yeah, I do have for 30 plus years try to discourage people from the color yellow on their feeders if they can, just because it just seems to attract the bees. So
yeah, and
let me
I'd like
see.
to. Oh, I
Go
just
ahead.
was going to say I'd like to put a plug in. So the native plants we're going to talk about tonight. Everybody talks about hummingbees, and they're worried about the decline in I mean, sorry, in honeybees and the decline in honeybees. But really, long before honeybees were brought over here by European settlers, native bees were here, and we really never had a good census or understanding of them because European settlers brought over honeybees, and it was off to the races. As a matter of fact, Bee Creek here in Platte County was named because by the time the settlers got here, there were so many honeybees that preceded them along the creek. That's how it got its name. But native bees are incredibly important. They don't really nest in large colonies like honeybees do. If they nest in colonies, it's typically 100 or less. But they get up earlier than honeybees do. They work in colder temperatures, hotter temperatures. They will pollinate more flowers than honeybees will. And so just these native flowers out in your yard, pay attention to the bumblebees and the other native bees that are using them, because they're incredibly important, and they're really the network of our biodiversity that holds us together. So I just want to put a plug in for them.
And these plants that we're going to discuss tonight all benefit them, right? I mean, they were pollinating them long before the honeybee.
Yeah, they're the plants that they, co-evolved with over thousands of years here. So, bees are kind of specialists. So they will learn to work a flower and they'll kind of stay with it. So we have native bees that are like the blue sage bee. It only comes out when the blue sage is blooming, and that's the only flower it works. Now, how it knows that, I don't know. There's bees that will only work penstemon. They only come out when the penstamon's blooming. So
it's amazing,
isn't it? It's crazy. And that blue sage bee is the cutest dang bee you'll ever see. Look it up. It is just adorable. But our native bees are incredibly important, and we're losing them at an astronomical rate. So what we're putting in our yard is important for them too. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely. I'm going to say hi to some people that are checking in. Now, S. Perry Fever. Is it Steve Perry? Are you a Journey fan from Michigan? How are you? Checking in. And Dave from Rhode Island. Hello. Oh, that reminds me, Steve from South Alabama, who's a real regular and was always on with us. I apologize. He sent me an email today. He said he had a fundraiser he had to go to tonight, but he wants to tell everybody hi and hi to Melanie. And he's on every week, but he couldn't. He's going to be joining us later. He's going to watch it after we're off tonight. But Dave from Rhode Island is a real regular, and Jen G from Maine, another regular, is on most weeks. Absolutely, welcome in. And Denise Alcott, she's my West Coast person I can usually count on being on here. She's on here most weeks. Absolutely. Hibiscus and all colors for me, a favorite. I had people to ask people to start submitting, their favorite hummingbird plants for sure. Peggy, Katie, I'm late. No. Yeah, absolutely. We haven't really delved in much into it yet. We've been waiting for the people to chime on. People are kind of slow getting on, like you said. Pat Robinette in Smithfield. She's local here. Absolutely. Sarah Hasselhoff. Do we have these native bees in Texas? I'm sure they do, right? I mean, native bees all over and pretty much everywhere you are. They're part of the ecosystem. And a lot of them are, like she said, a lot of them are very small. Some people call them sweat bees. Some of them sweat. There's all kind of names for them out there, but they're usually smaller. And a lot of times when people will say, "Oh, well, those bees got into my hummingbird feeder and they drowned," a lot of times those are those small native bees that can actually fit through some of those holes and get in there, and versus a big fat honeybee who they can't get in there, or some of the bigger species. But some of those smaller native bees, I'm sure you've got them.
Yeah, absolutely. Native bees are all across, and you may have specialists in your area that we don't have here, and vice versa. But it's fantastic to learn about your native bees, especially your specialists. And I'll just say one little more thing about it. We have a park here in Kansas City, Jerry Smith Park. It's the last remaining 80 acres in Jackson County of prairie, in a county that was once over 40% prairie. And Burroughs Audubon sponsored a native bee survey out there. And we found a native kleptoparasitic bee, it's just a type of bee, out there that science had not seen since the 1950s. Yet it hung on this little 80-acre park in Kansas City. So there was the same thing that happened. There was a blue sage bee that hung on an 8-acre park down in Springfield, Missouri. So they're all around, and they hang on to these little remnants of native prairie, and it's super important. So, yeah.
And landscaping can help them out for sure.
Absolutely.
By the way, I'm a huge Journey fan too. Sperry Fever. Birds by Ray Martinez. Hello from Manhattan, Kansas. All right, go Wildcats. All right, that's where my daughter went to school. All right. Well, we're going to start talking about plants now that we get people who had a chance to chime in, and we've covered kind of the basics of native planting and landscaping with natives. Let's get a plant up. Let's get a plant up here. Let's see. Let's go here. Got to click. There we go. All right. So Mary and I talked about the order we were going to do this. We thought we would start in the spring. Some of the earliest blooming, because whenever you want to attract hummingbirds, and you want hummingbirds to get attached to your yard, and you want them to stay in your yard and nest in your yard, raise young in your yard, it's good to have wildflowers that bloom through the summer. You don't want to just spring ones. You don't want just midsummer ones, just fall ones. You want to keep them happy by producing a lot of nectar for them all through the summer. And one of the first ones that blooms in my yard, and I got them from Mary, are these Virginia bluebells. Is that what they're called, Mary?
It is Virginia bluebells. This picture was actually taken in my backyard. Now, some years, if we have a really early warm spring, they may bloom before the hummingbirds get here, but most years they bloom right around the end of April, beginning of May, right in time for the hummingbirds to show up. This is, like I said, from my backyard. I've got a big patch of them back there that I've planted, and I can have a feeder out, and I will always see the hummingbirds on the Virginia bluebells probably 2 weeks before they ever come to the feeder.
And we always talk about hummingbirds and feeders, and all birds and feeders, and studies show that birds get only about 15% of their daily diet at most from bird feeders. And that means they're visiting a lot of flowers, and they're eating little tiny insects and other things as well. Whereas like seed feeders, the same thing. They're finding natural seeds and natural berries and things like that. But yeah, I always say you don't want to eat French fries all day, every day for the rest of your life. I mean, these guys are varying their diet a lot. So,
yep. So
right.
Virginia bluebells are spring ephemeral. They come up in spring, they bloom, and then they go away and disappear. They're not a flower that hangs around your yard, so they're great to plant where you've got other things. They're kind of a woodland plant, even though leaves are not out on the trees when they bloom. You'll find these in native areas around Kansas City. There's a really neat native area down in Lee Summit called Bluebell Valley that just, it's over an acre, larger than that, just solid bluebells. But they,
Wow.
if you've got woods or trees in your yard, it's a great, really rich soil. It's a great area to plant bluebells. So
We like I said, Mary gave me a few years back, and I put them in my landscaping out front, and they do spread. I mean, they kind of will keep growing and filling in a patch of dirt wherever you've got them there. But the hummingbirds absolutely do love them. And like I said, once they die out, you'll never hit for the rest of the year. You don't know that they were even there. Once they play out, they're a nice plant, absolutely.
yeah, and so I see a question: do they need a lot of sun? So they bloom before there's any leaves on the trees.
Right.
So they like woodlands. They like that rich soil in the woodlands. But sun really isn't an issue because the leaves aren't out yet. And by the time the trees leaf out, they're done and they disappear. You don't even know they're there. So
right. They're a great example of a plant to, like you said, you're gonna have their show, and hummingbirds will take advantage of it really early, and then they die back, and other plants can grow up, and like I said, you never know they were there.
Yep.
They're a great plant. All right, now here's one I don't have in my yard. Don't tell us about this one.
So this is coral honeysuckle. So honeysuckle is an interesting name because we have a lot of invasive honeysuckles. We have a lot of Japanese honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle in Kansas City that's invasive. But we also have native honeysuckles that are incredibly important. And so this is coral honeysuckle. There's also a yellow honeysuckle that is native. This is a hummingbird feast. If you have this in your yard, a male hummingbird will show up. This blooms just right after or on the tail end of the Virginia bluebells. It blooms in May. And if you get male hummingbird, he will sit on a branch or somewhere near this, and he does not leave. Like, he claims this as long as it's blooming. It's also host to the snowberry clearwing moth, which is those little bumblebee. Some people call them hummingbird moths, but those little clearwing bumblebee looking moths. Their caterpillars use this as a host plant. It does a fantastic show in May.
And like I said, given that many choices, watching a hummingbird work that plant is incredible because they are just all over the place, back and forth, up and down, up around, all the way around. Yeah, it certainly provides a male a really good, dependable food source. Now, some of the other really early plants that we don't have, I'm limited to 10 pictures, folks, so I can't have a ton of them, but just some of the other ones, depending upon where you live, that are really good. I really like Ohio Buckeye, or yellow Buckeye is called, which is a really early bloomer in our area. And so when those early returning hummingbirds get here, sometimes it's the only flower blooming, and it's down along creeks and streams a lot of times. That's another favorite of mine in the early part of the season. The columbine, which I did have a picture of, and I know you guys out west have a lot more columbine than we have. Got quite a diversity of it, but we have red columbine here, and I always see my hummingbird hitting that really early in the season.
Yep, and we also have a red buckeye. So I actually have a red buckeye planted right next to my coral honeysuckle, and so all the more reason that male will work the honeysuckle, then he'll go over and work the red buckeye, and then he goes and sits on a tree branch right above it and makes sure nobody else comes over and gets near it. So both of those are great plants.
Another picture taken in your yard.
Yes. So this is a red monarda. It's a red bee balm. So we have two native monardas, which are also great for hummingbirds. We have Monarda bradburnia, which is an earlier bloomer, and then we have Monarda fistulosa, which blooms in June. Those are more of a pink. This is a native. It's not native to Missouri, but this is kind of sold under. It's kind of interesting because it's a native, but it's sold under a cultivar name, which is Jacob Klein. But it's native out east, where Mark's from. And hummingbirds love it. So I kind of have this red area in my yard. So the red buckeye's there, the coral honeysuckle's there, and the red monarda's there. The buckeye and the coral honeysuckle bloom at the same time. The red monarda blooms in June. So it blooms just right after them. So it kind of keeps them in the same area. It keeps them kind of interested in that part of the yard. So.
And when you mentioned earlier, you were talking about a type of moth that utilizes the host on the coral honeysuckle. This next picture is one that we plant for the monarchs, right? And so monarchs and the hummingbirds take advantage of it. If you guys, before you join in, a lot of times you'll see a cover photo for Mark's Backyard Birds, and this is the cover bird for that photo, and this is swamp milkweed, marsh milkweed. Which one is it?
Well, this is actually the annual milkweed. But any milkweed is great for hummingbirds. We have swamp milkweed. We have butterfly milkweed. So swamp milkweed is Asclepias incarnata. Butterfly milkweed is Asclepias tuberosa. And then, of course, we also have common milkweed. So all of them are fantastic for hummingbirds. And they're also hosts for the monarch caterpillar, which, is one of the species that we're worried about. And so the more milkweed we can get out there, the more we can also help the monarchs. This is your yard, right, Mark?
This is actually on a prairie. As a friend of mine, but mine's not this big though. Yeah, I think this was actually a Prairie State Park. But
this is tuberosa. This is the butterfly milkweed, and so this is fantastic. I actually planted this, and this likes really dry. So depending on what conditions you have in your yard, there's a milkweed for you. If you've got kind of a wet area, like a rain garden, swamp milkweed's great. If you've got a dry area with a lot of sun, this butterfly milkweed is great. I've actually used this in like parking lot islands that get only moisture they get is from the sun. It's from the sky, and then the sun beats down on them. They're surrounded by concrete. It thrives in that. On prairies, you find this in areas kind of a shallow soil, really hot conditions, glade type areas. And it's just stunning when it blooms. It's just a stunning orange.
And mine are, as soon as mine bloom, mine are covered in zebra swallowtails.
Yep. Butterflies love it. And the further west you go, butterfly milkweed becomes yellow. So it's the same species of plant. It's just to the east, for whatever reason, it's orange. And then as you go west, it turns yellow.
Yeah, this is one of our favorite wildflowers in our yard year after year after year. And like we talked about earlier, the reason for using natives is they don't require water. You don't have to water them. You don't have to, they're adapted to our soils, they're adapted to our weather conditions, they're adapted to our pollinators. And so, these plants don't require extra care. And that's one of the great things about them.
Yep. And
All
this
right.
one stays about 2.5, 3 feet tall versus, like your swamp milkweed, your common milkweed, it'll get, 4 or 5 feet tall. So
Yeah.
again, based on what kind of height you want, you've also got some options there.
And it definitely adds color.
It
Now,
does.
this is the one I don't have in my yard, but this is your yard.
This is maybe my favorite native plant. So this is called downy skullcap. It enjoys shade, especially in the hot afternoon. Um, I have a hummingbird on it all the time, and I tried to get a picture of the hummingbird on it, and I've been really busy with work. And I told Mark the couple times I've gone out there to do it. One time the neighbor decided to wash his car.
Yeah.
The other time they decided to ride their bikes. But I said I've got a hummingbird on it every time except when I go outside with a camera in my hand. But
Right.
it blooms through the month of July into early August. Mine bloomed a really long time this year. I think this is just absolutely stunning. As a matter of fact, I got my dad into natives, and he was over one time, and I said, "Come here, I want you to look at this. This is my favorite native plant." And he said, "How come you have not planted that in my yard?" um, it's stunning. It will spread gently. It will kind of form a colony. Like I said, it's great in shade to partial shade. Make sure it's got some shade in the afternoon. It just doesn't tolerate full sun. Um, but it is a fantastic plant.
And you're bringing up the questions that we get when people ask. When we do the native plant sales, we host them at our store, and Burroughs Audubon puts on the spring one, and Platland Trust puts on and benefits from the fall one. But we have experts that are there. We know when we do them, because the people come and they have their questions. Is I've got a, like she said, I got a wet area, I've got a dry area, I got a partial sun area, I got a full day sun area, and people who know these plants, or take you right to the plants that that do well in those situations. And you can contact, like I said, if you contact a native nursery, especially if it's um, sometimes commercial nurseries will tell you something's native, and they'll put native signs on it. But again, it doesn't mean it's grown locally there. So it's worth doing a little bit of research in your area as to the nursery you contact, or especially if you have a native plant society, or the state organization. Grownative.org is a great site here in Missouri. It really promotes and gives you tons of information. The Missouri Department of Conservation is awesome about providing information about butterfly plants, hummingbird plants. And Mary and I are going to do more of these. We're going to do favorite, berry producing native plants and things like that. We want to do more of them, but we were just concentrating on hummingbirds tonight. So, and my favorite of all time hummingbird plant is this guy. I had one of these outside of my front door at my home in North Carolina before we left and moved to Missouri. And I walked out one morning, and there was an albino ruby-throated hummingbird feeding on this cardinal flower. And it hovered there for a second at me, and then it turned and flew off through the woods. I watched the white bird fly through the woods, and that's the last I saw him. But even before that, was my favorite hummingbird plant. Cardinal flower is red lobelia, right? Is the other name for it?
Yep, and there's also blue lobelia, which they like almost as much.
And that's a spring
But
plant.
it blooms earlier. Yeah, it blooms
Yep.
in June, whereas cardinal flower is more of a August blooming now kind of plant. They
It,
both enjoy areas that are a little bit more moist.
mhm. What gets me about this plant, always when it just so impressed me, it's almost like this plant when you watch it grow, and it's pretty tall, it sends up this stalk, and it's just this green stalk, and it's almost like you can turn your head and turn around and it's all red. I mean, it's like they just explode open and their flowers. It to me, it's just a gorgeous plant, and hummingbirds absolutely love it.
They do. They do. It is. It's probably one of the finicky. Blue lobelia is not quite as finicky. I think cardinal flower is a little bit more finicky about where you put it, but once you get it going, it's just stunning. I mean, it's one of those plants you'll you'll come in the house and you'll think about it and go back outside to see it. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, I love this plant, and like I said, we all have our favorites and everything. But But again, it doesn't bloom till now. So you've got to have those bluebells and the butterfly weed and all those through the year to get you to here. But just now this time of year, this is actually a great plant. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of bragging here on my son. How's that?
Yeah.
You remember this? Mary was a huge part of this undertaking. This was my son's Eagle Scout project at the elementary school he went to, not very far from the house here, and they had a terrible area out in front of at the entrance to their school. And as his Eagle project, we re-landscaped the area with native wildflowers and made it a certified monarch
Way
what
station.
way station. Mary
Hmm.
can tell you more about that. But this is just kind of I threw this in here one because I wanted to bring on my son, but the other, of course, is that just this diversity of the plants here. It attracts all kind of pollinators. And one of the things that we didn't have enough picture time or slots for that Mary said we really need to talk about is the importance of plants to hummingbirds that attract insects. And because they have to feed their babies insects, and they do eat small insects. So what are some of the plants that you wanted to talk about there?
Yeah. So I like to use this analogy. So somebody said, if you have the nectar plants, it's great. You'll get butterflies, you'll get hummingbirds, but it's kind of like a singles bar. They'll come, they'll date, but they're not going to raise their families there. You want to make sure that you have plants that host insects because that's what they're going to use to feed their families. And most birds will forage within 164 feet of the nest to feed their young. So it's not
Right.
like they're going to the park 3 blocks down the road to get insects to come back. If you've got nesting birds in your yard, you've got enough insects to support them within 164 feet of that nest. So think about plants that are hosts to insects. And Doug Tallamy, if you've ever read Bringing Nature Home or you get on any of the websites or look up any articles, he talks about, the number of different caterpillar species that plants host. So number one is, and I would love to do a see if everybody guessed, but we don't have time for it. But the number one plant for cat as a caterpillar host that hosts the most species of caterpillars is oak trees. So if you have an oak tree in your yard, it hosts over 400. It can host over 400 different species of caterpillars. So oak trees, willow trees, cherry trees, native cherry trees, all of those are fantastic. And of course, birds nest in trees. So another benefit to having those trees in your yard. But then also when it comes to flowering plants, things like goldenrod, Joe Pye weed. Goldenrod is the fuel that also fuels the monarch migration in the fall, but it hosts over 100 different caterpillar species. So by having this diversity in your yard of nectar plants and plants that host insects, yep, here we go. This is rigid goldenrod, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, by having those in your yard, you're not only supplying plants for the nectar eating wildlife that you have, but also the insects that they need to raise their young. So,
And I know I've heard you use the term many times when you talk about people buying in landscaping with non-natives. They're just dead zones for insects. Some of these plants are there's no caterpillars, there's no insects. They're introduced species and just playing on
yeah,
what
you
they're
might
looking
as
for.
well put a concrete statue out there. Doug Tallamy talks about, walking around an oak tree and the hundreds of different caterpillars that he finds on it, and then walking around a Bradford pear, also known as a calorie pear tree. And I
Yeah.
think he found one caterpillar and he said he just thought it got lost and wandered up the wrong tree. Um, but you might as well put a concrete statue out there. When I go to plant in my yard, I plant things to be eaten. One of Talamy's great quotes is, "A plant that has not fed anything has not done its job." And
Right.
so I want a plant that's going to host wildlife. So what plant can I get that's going to host the wildlife that I want to attract to my yard? And
And
so,
when you talk to people at the store at the native plant sale and they're asking you about plants, what to plant is, we try to be very conscious. I mean, we know what great plants are great for wildlife, but we also you take a great deal of care to try to let people know how they're going to grow. And Pat Robinette's asking here, do these you do them in groupings or you start with a single plant and things like that? I guess every plant's different, right? I mean, some are going to spread like purple coneflowers. I mean, my goodness, I've got so many purple coneflowers in my front yard, and the bluebell spread. But the columbine I never had a second columbine come up, where I planted it. So some do and some don't, right?
Yeah, and columbine usually spreads. Like I have a friend that says you have one, you're going to have 10,000 in 5 years. So part of it depends on your yard too. I think your coneflowers just intimidated it. So
To push everything out. Yeah,
yep.
exactly.
But yeah, I would say start somewhere. So I like the diversity. So I like to have different species of plants in my yard. But if you just want to start with one, start with one. I mean, start somewhere, because anything that you do that benefits wildlife in your yard helps to give this 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 weave together this platform that supports biodiversity. And I talked about like that one bee that was out at Jerry Smith Park that science hadn't seen since 1950. If we had more natives around, if everybody had just a little bit of native plants in their yard, we could start to create these corridors in which these species could move around, and we could increase the amount of biodiversity that we had in the places that they showed up. The problem is, there's a park or a conservation area that's got a lot of native species, and then there's a lot of green grass and Bradford pear trees in between them. And that's what we want to eliminate. We want to start to put these areas together that support wildlife, that can form these corridors that allow them to move and grow.
What was Ptolemy's statistic about if everybody converted like 10% of their yard to natives? It'd be the equivalent of some gigantic wildlife refuge or something.
Yeah, it's great. It would be greater than all of the national parks put together.
Yeah, if you just 10% of your yard, if you quit mowing it and quit the grass grow and converted it to just some native wildflowers like we're talking about, if everybody did that, that would be more space in all the wildlife refuge in national parks or whatever, all that acreage, and that's an incredible statistic. And how hard is it to just take 10% of your yard and change it over to an area that is not manicured and for wildlife? So
and it's everything. It's
What's
flowers. It's everything. It's flowers.
Oh.
It's native trees. It's I have a friend up in Kearney that started putting native plants in her yard, and she's got this pretty big milkweed display around her mailbox. And she said, milkweed's showing up everywhere now. It's showing up at the entrance. It's showing up back in the woods. It's showing up in the neighbor's yard. But her bringing that milkweed in, it's kind of caught on. Some people are planting it. Some places it's spreading. But now she's seeing milkweed everywhere, where before you would drive through and there was really nothing for wildlife from yard to yard to yard. So,
and they're talking about if the monarchs are going to be saved, it's going to be in the urban areas, right? I mean, it's got to be people doing that in the urban areas, because in the farmlands, with conservation reserve program and those things are not what they used to be, and they're disking more and more space. And if people aren't planting milkweeds and stuff in the urban areas, it's going to be tough on the monarchs for sure.
Yeah, and think about how much of our land is taken up by urban areas. I mean, that's a pretty huge swath to fly over with nothing, to sustain you. So, even if you've got stuff outside the urban areas, I mean, if you're going to fly from, North Kansas City through Overland Park, that is a pretty long distance to go without having the ability to refuel.
Yeah. All right. Ruth Music, she loves her columbine, absolutely. And your spreads, like I said, I think Mary's right. I think my purple coneflowers keep my columbine from able to spread because there's so many of them. All right, let's see. We got a couple more questions. Hi, everyone. I always see hummingbirds along with bees and other bugs visiting my petunias and lantanas flowers and our big oak tree. Absolutely. And while we are, we're talking about native plants and wildflowers, we don't want to downplay the importance of, especially for people who live in apartments and they live in areas where they can't do a lot of landscaping. Hanging baskets and potted plants those are great for hummingbirds, right?
Yeah, they are. So, we talk about nectar gaps, and one of the things is when you have native plants, natives are here to sustain themselves. So their point is to come up, bloom so that they can reproduce, and then they store energy so they can come back next year. When you plant annuals, those are here to kind of bloom throughout the season, right? So
Right.
there are annuals that have wildlife benefit. Now, typically, most of them are not host plants to any type of insects. Most of them do not host caterpillars or They're not what young insects use to feed off of. But that doesn't mean that they can't help fill in some of the nectar gaps in your yard.
Sure.
I would just say, do what you can and be aware of what wildlife benefit, what your planting has.
And I always talk about in the springtime for people who've never attracted hummingbirds, especially, early on, a hanging basket along with your hummingbird feeder can get that hummingbird's attention
Yep.
and get it and help you discover their feeder. So,
Yep, absolutely.
all right.
So clover and certain weeds. So weeds are kind of an interesting word because
yep.
what is a weed?
A plant growing where you don't want it to. Is what I
right. We could have a whole nother show on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, clover is beneficial as far as a nectar plant. Wasn't it you, Mark, that said that there was a clover field that had a bunch of migrating monarchs that Mike tagged one year?
Yeah, Mike Hicks down in Blue Springs, he red clover, I think it was a red clover field, and he caught like 150 monarchs in this field and tagged them all. It was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not native. People plant it for honeybees. It's not. So let me back up. So I'm not dishing clover at all. It's certainly got its benefits, like Mark said. It doesn't have the root system. Native plants have 80% of their biomass underground. So they're a great way to sequester carbon, to improve soils, to stabilize things from erosion. There's a lot of ecosystem services that native plants give us. Clover doesn't quite do all that, but it has some benefits. So I'm not dishing clover at all. It's not quite the same as a native, but it certainly can provide nectar.
What was it whenever we were started on Matthew's Eagle Project? And thank you, Peggy, for recognizing that. When we had to tear out, and the soil, and we had to, was it knotweed? There was some noxious weed that was up there that was really bad, and then of course you go, yeah, but it also hosts one of the caterpillar for one of the butterflies or something on there. Is like, so even a weed, one that we consider be a noxious weed, can have benefit to wildlife.
It was that there's a milkweed that's a vine. It's blue. Some people call it blue vine. It's a milkweed vine that hosts milkweed caterpillar. That hosts monarch caterpillars.
It's crazy,
Yeah, we took it out. So you can buy these native plants. Absolutely, you can buy these native plants. So there are nurseries in Kansas City that have native plants. There's also native plant sales. If you go to Missouri Wildflower Nursery, he'll list his fall plant sales. I know Mark's got one coming up at the store. Do you know the date off the top of your head?
23rd of September, I think. Pretty sure that's whatever that Saturday is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And before you get much too further past this, I remember your story where you bought some milkweed from a nursery and you took it with caterpillars to, I think, Dylan's daycare, and you put the monarch caterpillar on it, and what happened? It was a tragic, terrible story.
Oh, that was actually black swallowtails. The native plant that's their host is golden Alexanders, but they also are the ones that you find on fennel, dill, and parsley. So those are things that host them. So Dylan's school was raising black swallowtail caterpillars in their classroom, and they had eaten it all, and they went to a nursery. So if you're ever going to buy something like parsley or something from a nursery to feed caterpillars, I always check to make sure that there's caterpillars on it at the nursery. But they just went and bought some at a local nursery. They put the caterpillars on it. All the kids were standing around, and the caterpillars immediately started seizing and died because it had been treated with pesticide.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that story. How terrible that would be, the kids watching these caterpillars falling off the plant. And,
they'd pick them up and put them back on. They'd seize more and fall off.
Yeah, definitely. Back again. Melanie, my producer, is over here reminding me for sure. Remember, the different plants in different places, and that's why we really. I wish hummingbirds would share a feeder like the rest of the birds. Yeah, Ricky, we always said that hummingbirds didn't go to kindergarten. They did not learn how to share. They never have. So yeah, and there's reasons why they are the way they are. And they, territory and also fattening up in the fall. There's reasons, but yes, they are very aggressive, especially the adults. But yeah, a reminder that we are here in Kansas City, in the heart of the country. So again, you guys, like I said, you guys have checked in from all over, and that is definitely check into your local native plant nurseries. The one here in Missouri is wonderful. But if you live in like Maine, checked in, or Washington State and Colorado, there's got to be native plants available for you in those states. Just do a little bit of research in the internet.
Yeah, Audubon actually, if you go to the Audubon website, they actually have a place on there where you can put in where you're at, and it will list native plants for your areas that are good for birds. So
there you go. Absolutely, yeah. It's it is. And when I was director of Audubon in Western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, before I got there, they had actually started the plans and started building a native plant nursery there, which was started by a volunteer and a volunteer group, and it was great. I mean, the plants were growing right there in the forest because Pittsburgh is really forested, and a lot of the plants that they grew, were targeted for all that area, and that's the same, versus Nebraska. A lot of the plants are going to be geared toward open, sunny areas and things like that. So a little bit of research will go a long way, and your birds will definitely benefit. Hummingbirds, not just hummingbirds, like Mary's been talking about, the insects, and just consider native when it comes to. There you go. Back up again. That when you're talking about your landscaping, the native plants are the way to go, and your birds will thank you, and you'll love it. And like I said, we're want to do more of these. We want to do one, like I said, our favorite berry producing plants, native plants in the fall, especially when it's really important for birds and fall migration and the winter season. They take advantage of those. A lot of those big fruit producing ones, and of course, insects are always a topic when it comes to birds. They have to have those insects. So, Mary, thank you so much. You got anything to add?
You. I don't. We're getting, we're gearing up for migration here. I mean, it's peak hummingbird season right now.
Yeah.
So, get out, pay attention to what's, when you go to your parks and your natural areas and you're out in nature, just kind of pay attention to what's native. When you're driving around your neighborhood, start to look and see who has native things in their yard and who doesn't. I think it'll surprise you, and it'll kind of help determine like what direction you want to take your yard in. So
yeah, I never forget, because I don't know that I've ever heard this in North Carolina, but the first fall, late summer, fall, I was here in Missouri in Burr Oak Woods down in Blue Springs. I remember being out bird watching, really quiet, just me, and hearing what I thought was rain. Little light rain in the heart of the forest, and it turned out it was hackberry caterpillars.
Yep, hackberry. Yep, hackberry emperor. Yep, hackberry emperor moths. Yep.
And they're eating and pooping and eating and pooping and eating and pooping in the forest, and you could just hear the poop falling and hitting the leaves. And
it's called frass, Mark. Frass.
Oh, there you go. Scientific word.
Yep.
Yep. So that it just shows you what they're eating on. Oh, we got some questions coming in here. Let's see, what's this one? What's your favorite dotard bird? I'm sorry, Legend. I don't know that one. I don't. Maybe some clarification there. Carol, great information on making sure we are attracting insects. Absolutely. Thank you. And hello, Bill from Lebanon, Pennsylvania. How about that? Yeah, I spent a couple of good years out there and enjoyed my time in Pennsylvania. So, well, I'm going to thank Mary and let her get going. She has a young son, and I've seen the dog look around you a couple of times behind you.
Oh.
Your Whitefoot.
Yep.
Yep. Mary Nemecek, thank you so much, and continue
Thank
your
you.
great work, because I know you do. You work tirelessly for conservation, and we really appreciate it. And we'll have you on again in the future.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Good night, guys. Thank you so much. For any other questions, if I missed somebody, I really apologize. I know it's been it can get hectic, especially when I have a guest on, trying to keep my eye attuned over there. Melanie's been trying to help me, so I really apologize if I missed a question. But again, if you missed anything, you can always go back and watch these over again and take notes, and the name of plants and things like that, and search for them in your yard. And another one of the reasons why we do this is because the fall is a great time to plant wildflowers. Getting into that late summer, early fall season is a great time to get native plants in the ground. So that's one of the reasons we want to do it now too. So let's see. I search for native plants for hummingbirds in my area. Excellent. Yep, that's the way to do it. The information's out there. You're welcome, Ann. Thank you for tuning in. And Steve Perry Fever, I love it. Thank you. You're right. Mary is awesome. When we started out, I was the teacher and she was the mentor, one of my star students. And now I'm telling you, she teaches me all the time. She's very dedicated to conservation and in so many ways. So glad to have her on. Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Again, send in ideas for future video, what you want us to talk about. I got a request yesterday to do a species focus on the tufted titmouse. So that's going to be coming up pretty soon. I want to do that as a favorite bird for a lot of people, and I've had a couple of requests for that. So we're going to do that. All right, beneath the willow tree. Thank you. Enjoy the videos. Excellent. As usual, you're the best listener. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad that you enjoy the programs. You guys are great, and we thank you for your support. Give the likes, thumbs up, all those really help us, and we appreciate your support. Hi, Ellie. You're welcome. Ellie is one of my regular customers in the store. We see her a lot. So again, thank you so much, guys. Have a good night, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. So, like I said, I'll have some videos up, but live every other Thursday. So have a good evening.